How to build a fantasy land for your TTRPG/novel. Wow, if only someone had two very easy questions for me to answer. What does it look like? Who lives here? So back to question one, what does it look like? I'm talking about the actual structure of the land, so geographical terms. This all builds into what actually fits into your kingdom, and hear me out. So once you have that idea of the geographical land in your brain, you have the climate, the resources, and natural wonders. And this is already giving you multiple things to work with for a story or a TTRPG. So let me use a location that I'm making currently in Gothica as an example for some information on the board. So in geographical, we have plains, woodland, and caves. So those are the sort of key things that I'm picturing for this area. As a climate, it's temperate, so we're not too hot, we're not too cold. We're in that nice Midland area in Europe. I'm basing the game in sort of old England, Europe anyway, so this makes sense. Resources, we have wood, stone, and ores. Links to the plains, woodland, and caves, of course. For natural wonders, if we have old woodlands, we have ancient woodlands, and in ancient woodlands, we have a big old ancient tree. How easy was that? We're already getting an idea for a big, full fantasy land. With all that information, we can go into even further detail. Climate leads into fauna and flora, resources leads into trade and infrastructure, and natural wonders leads into the lore of the world. Now you're thinking, Elliot, this is really, really simple. This is like a spider diagram that just gets narrower and narrower into finer detail. Hold on. Sound effects added. I have one more trick up my sleeve. So every time you find out a new piece of information, I want you to ask yourself two questions. Who, so that's who lives here, who operates here, basically who is involved with this piece of information, and then WCH, which is what could happen. So this is your storyline hooks, basically. So with resources, what could happen is your kingdom is very rich in resources, but that means neighboring kingdoms might invade you. And who? Well, who is required to mine these resources? With wood, we need woodcutters. Stone, we need stonemasons. Ores, we need miners. Just by doing this, we have a people and a potential threat or conflict. So you could keep going on and on like this until you have really narrowed down what your land looks like, what it's made up of, and kind of who lives here. But that was the second question, who lives here? So let's get rid of this. Whoa! Let's start again. So question two, who lives here? It's very important for a fantasy land to have people in it. I don't know if you knew that. That might have been why you're struggling, but who lives here? So I think we can all agree that fantasy lands need people, but they also kind of need creatures, especially if you're doing a TTRPG. Those are the players, those are the monsters. No, those are the players, those are the monsters. And since we have new information, we should ask ourselves two questions. We can't ask ourselves who lives here because that's the broad question, but we can ask ourselves what does it look like and what could happen for that story element. So, what does it look like? Well, people and creatures coexisting. Potential, but more likely that people are hunters after creatures, and creatures are the predators that hunt people. Do you see what I'm getting at? Do you see what I'm putting down? So let's focus in on people for a second. We have religions, kingdoms, and culture. We could expand on this. Society is a very, very big topic. But let's look at kingdoms. So answer the question, what does a kingdom look like? Well, it probably has settlements, towns, villages, cities. Decide on what kind of structures they are. Are they made of brick? Are they made of stone? Are they made of wood? So those settlements, what are they? What purpose do they serve? What do they look like? And what could happen? Well, if you have a settlement or a city which is rich in resources, maybe that is invaded, or maybe there's an economic crash and suddenly resources aren't worth as much as they are. Or maybe there's an economic boom and the resources are fantastic and everyone that lives there is very happy, which, I mean, can happen in Fantasyland, but in my TTRPGs, everyone is sad. That's why it's Gothica. Everyone's sad. Everyone's sad in Gothica. Politics, scary subject. Ooh. No, not really. What does it look like? Is it democracy? Is it a communist party? Is it an oligarchy? Once you figure that out, what could happen? Perhaps it is an oligarchy run by an elite. Maybe they crumble, and then suddenly you have a populace of people who are unruled by a leader. Do they take up arms? Do they act confused? Do they migrate? Lots of answers come from a single question, which builds upon questions that you've answered. All tiny, tiny little questions, but information that builds. One question, and we have all of this. And this is an example that I've done in like 5 minutes. Imagine what you can do in days, weeks, building these huge worlds, these webs of information. I think you can do it. So to recap how to build your fantasy land, question 1, what does it look like? Question 2, who lives here? And question 3/4? There was a fourth question? It only started with 2. What did / could happen here? So if you don't want to learn about the future, for your future story hooks, if you want lore, what happened here? Maybe that oligarchy city crumbled, and it crumbled by the hands of the people. They literally stole stones to build smaller towns. That's just one idea of many that we could have had. These tiny, tiny questions on broad subjects of who lives in a fantasy land. Well, we found out that we could get down to a single session, or maybe 3 or 4 with my players, but an idea, a small concept from a big question to a very big question. I hope this helped. This helps me. If you're curious if this system actually works, I'm using it in Gothica Plagueworlds, which is the 5e compatible TTRPG that I'm building. It's all about diseases, plagues, and it's set in a Victorian-inspired fantasy land. And November, it goes on Kickstarter. It goes on Kickstarter! But you can sign up now to follow along and see how it's being made. Anyway, thank you so much.